In January of the year 897, a court convened in Rome to put a man on trial for perjury. It seemed ordinary enough. There was a judge. There were witnesses. There was a defendant, dressed in his finest robes, seated before the court in silence. There was just one small procedural issue. The defendant had been dead for 7 months, and he had not exactly arrived voluntarily. The Pope had ordered the previous Pope dug up, dressed in full papal vestments, propped on a throne, and cross-examined. This actually happened. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod. The moment the papacy hit rock bottom, and then, quite literally, kept digging. But before we exhume the details, subscribe to HistOddities and tell us in the comments which odd corner of history we should dig into next. To understand how the church ended up suing a corpse, you need to understand that the 9th century was not the papacy's finest hour. After Charlemagne's empire collapsed, Italy became a knife fight between noble families, and the papal throne was the grand prize. The papal throne changed hands through bribery, riots, and the occasional murder. Holiness had become, at best, an optional job qualification. Between 872 and 965, there were more than 24 popes, roughly the turnover of a fast food franchise, with more strangulation. Enter Formosus. His name literally means good-looking in Latin, which historians agree is the last flattering thing about this entire era. A skilled diplomat and missionary, so popular that the people of Bulgaria specifically requested him as their archbishop. That popularity was the problem. Pope John VIII saw him as a rival, accused him of coveting the papacy, and excommunicated him. Formosus fled Rome, got himself unexcommunicated, worked his way back into favor, and in 891 became pope anyway. But here is the technicality that matters. Church law said a bishop could not transfer from one seat to another, and Formosus already held Porto, which meant that, on paper, his entire papacy was arguably illegal. Nobody made that argument while he was alive, of course. As Pope, Formosus had one job that kept blowing up in his face: choosing who to crown Holy Roman Emperor. The Duke of Spoleto, a man named Guy, strong-armed Formosus into crowning first him, then his teenage son Lambert, as co-emperors. Formosus did not enjoy being the Spoleto family's personal crown dispenser, so he secretly invited a rival, Arnulf of the East Franks, to invade. Arnulf marched on Italy, took Rome, and in 896, Formosus crowned him emperor instead. For about 5 minutes, the plan worked. Then Arnulf suffered a paralyzing stroke and went home, and in April of 896, Formosus died, officially of natural causes, which left one very powerful, very furious family holding a grudge against a man now safely beyond the reach of consequences. Or so he thought. After a brief interlude, including Pope Boniface VI, who lasted 15 whole days, the throne went to Stephen VI. Stephen was backed by, you guessed it, the Spoleto family, and in January of 897, he gave the order: dig him up. The corpse of Formosus, 7 months into decomposition, was exhumed, dressed head to toe in full papal vestments, and carried into the Lateran Basilica. It was propped upright on a throne to stand trial, while the assembled clergy of Rome were required to sit and watch. Contemporary accounts describe the scene: candles flickering, incense burning, and a dead man in golden robes staring blankly at his accusers. A teenage deacon was appointed to stand behind the body and answer questions on its behalf, a duty left out of his seminary brochure. Stephen served as both prosecutor and judge, an arrangement lawyers describe as not ideal. He screamed the charges directly at the corpse: perjury, coveting the papacy, and illegally transferring from the bishopric of Porto to the throne of St. Peter. corpse, in what legal historians consider a bold strategy, said nothing. Formosus was found guilty on all counts. His papacy was declared null and void. Every ordination he had ever performed invalidated, throwing clergy careers across Europe into chaos. The 3 fingers of his right hand, the fingers he used for blessings, were cut off. The vestments were stripped away. He was dressed in commoner's rags and buried in a graveyard for foreigners. Then Stephen changed his mind and had him dug up again. This time, the body was thrown into the Tiber River. Formosus was buried more times after his death than most popes are elected. If Stephen expected applause, he had badly misread the room. Even by 9th century standards, putting a corpse on trial struck Rome as too much. Then the omens started. Legend says a hermit fished the body from the Tiber, gave it a quiet burial, and miracles began. Around the same time, the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the very courtroom of the Synod, was badly damaged by an earthquake. Subtle. Rome took the hint, even if Stephen didn't. Within months, a mob rose up and stripped him of his papal insignia. He was thrown into prison, and in the summer of 897, strangled. The man who prosecuted a corpse had become one. His successor spent years cleaning up. Pope Theodore II, reigning just 20 days, annulled the synod and reburied Formosus with honors. Pope John IX went further, banning trials of dead people entirely, a law you would be forgiven for, assuming already existed. Then Pope Sergius III, who had attended the original synod, took power and reaffirmed the conviction. History's pettiest sequel. The Cadaver Synod kicked off what historians politely call the papacy's nadir. Decades of coups, murders, and mysteriously brief pontificates. It took more than a century for the office to recover its dignity. Formosus himself was never fully cleared or re-convicted. To this day, his case remains technically complicated. Impressive for a defendant who has been dead for over 1100 years. So here is our question for the comments. If you were that teenage deacon assigned to defend a corpse, what is your legal strategy? Best defense wins absolutely nothing, but we will read them. And if you enjoyed this, there is more where that came from. History is full of courtrooms, crowns, and corpses that refuse to stay buried. HistOddities exists to dig them back up. Subscribe so the algorithm does not bury us in a graveyard for foreign channels. And check out our video on history's most bizarre punishments next. This has been HistOddities. Stay odd.